Chapter 5 of The Poor Little Rich Girl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan Umpleby. The Poor Little Rich Girl by Eleanor Gates, Chapter 5. The Crescent of the Drive, never without its pageant, the broad river thronged with craft, the high forest-fringed precipice, and the houses that could be glimpsed beyond, all these played their part in Gwendolyn's pretend games. She crowded the drive with the soldiers of the General, rank upon rank of marching men whom he reviewed with pride, while his great bronze steed pranced tirelessly, and she, a swordless Joan of Arc in a three-cornered hat and smartly tailored habit, pranced close beside to share all honors from the wide back of her own mettlesome war horse. As for the river vessels, she took long pretend journeys upon them, every detail of which she carefully carried out. The companions selected were those smiling friends that appeared at neighboring windows, or she chose hearty, happy laundresses from the roofs, adding, by way of variety, some small, bashful acquaintances made at the dancing school of Monsieur Tellegen. But more often, imagining herself a princess, and the nursery a prison tower, from the loopholes of which she viewed the great, free world, she liked to people the boats out of stories that Potter had told her on rare but happy occasions. A prosaic down traveling steamer became the wonderful ship of Ulysses, his seamen bound to smokestacks and railing, his prow pointed for the ocean, whereinto the river crammed its deep flood. A smaller boat, smoking its way upstream, changed into the fabled bark of a man by the name of Jason, and at the bow of this Argo sat Johnny Blake, fish-pole over the side, feet dangling, line trailing, and a silvery trout spinning at the hook. A third boat, smaller still, and driven forward by oars, bore a sad, level-lying, white-clad figure, Elaine, dead through the plotting of cruel servants, and now rowed by the hoary dumb toward a peaceful mooring at the foot of some far timbered slope. In each of the houses across the wide river she often established a pretend home. Her father was with her always, her mother too, in a silken gown, with a jeweled chaplet on her head. But her household was always blissfully free of those whose chief design it was to thwart and terrify her: Miss Royle, Jane, Thomas, her teachers as a body, also policemen, doctors, and bears. Old Potter was, of course, the pretend butler, and Rosa, notwithstanding the fact that she had once been, while at Johnny Blake's, the herald of a hated bedtime, went as maid. Gwendolyn had often secretly coveted the superintendent's residence in the park, so that, instead of straggling along on a concrete pavement at rare intervals, held captive by the hand that was in Jane's, she might always have the right to race willy-nilly across the grass, chase the tame squirrels to shelter, even climb a tree. But more earnestly did she covet a house beyond the precipice. Were there not trees there? And rocks? Without a doubt there were Johnny Blake glades as well, glades bright with flowers and green with lacy ferns. For of these glades Gwendolyn had received proof. Following a sprinkle on a cool day, a light west wind brought a butterfly against a pane of the front window. When Gwendolyn raised the sash, the butterfly fluttered in, throwing off a jeweled drop as he came, and alighted upon the dull rose and green of a flower in the border of the nursery rug. His wings were flat together, and he was tipped to one side, like a skiff with tinted sails. But when the sails were dry, and parted once more, and sunlight had replaced shower, he launched forth from the pink landing place of Gwendolyn's palm, and sped away and away, due west. But the view from the side window! Beyond the line of step houses, and beyond the buildings where the maids hung their wash, were roofs. They seemed to touch, to have no streets between them anywhere. They reached as far as Gwendolyn could see. They were all heights, all shapes, all varieties as to tops, some being level, others coming to a point at one corner, a few ending in a tower. One tower, which was square and on the outermost edge of the roofs, had a clock in its summit. When night settled, a light sprang up behind the clock, a great round light that was like a single shining eye. She did not know the proper name for all those acres of roof, but Jane called them downtown. At all times they were fascinating. Of a winter's day the snow whitened them into beauty. The rain washed them with its slanting downpour till their metal sheeting glistened as brightly as the sides of the General's horse. The sea fog, advanced by the wind, blotted out all but the nearest, wrapped these in torn shrouds, and heaped itself about the dun-breathed chimneys like the smoke of 100 fires. She loved the roofs far more than drive or river or wooded expanse, more because they meant so much, and that without her having to do much pretending. For across them, in some building which no one had ever pointed out to her, in a street through which she had never driven, was her father's office. She herself often selected the building he was in, placing him first in one great structure, then in another. Whenever a new one rose, as it often did, there she promptly moved his office. Once for a whole week he worked directly under the great glowing eye of the clock. Just now she was standing at the side window of the nursery, looking away across the roofs. The fat old gentleman at the gray-haired house was sponging off the rubber plant, and waving the long green leaves at her in greeting. Gwendolyn feigned not to see. Her lips were firmly set. A scarlet spot of determination burned round either dimple. Her gray eyes smoldered darkly, with a purpose that was unswerving. "I'm just going down there," she said aloud. Rustle, rustle, rustle. It was Miss Royle entering. Though Saturday was yet 2 days away, the governess was preparing to go out for the afternoon, and was busily engaged in drawing on her gloves, her glance alternating between her task and the timepiece on the schoolroom mantel. "Gwendolyn, dear," said she, "you can have such a lovely long pretend game between now and supper, can't you?" Gwendolyn moved her head up and down in slow assent. Doing so, she rubbed the tip of her nose against the smooth glass. The glass was cool. She liked the feel of it. "You can travel," enthused Miss Royle. "And where do you think you'll go?" The gray eyes were searching the tiers of windows in a distant granite pile. "Oh, Asia, I guess," answered Gwendolyn indifferently. She had lately reviewed the latter part of her geography. "Asia? Fine! And how will you travel, darling? In your sweet car?" A pause. Miss Royle was habitually honeyed in speech and full of suggestions when she was setting out thus. She deceived no one. Yet it was just as well to humor her. "Oh, I'll ride a musk ox. Or," picking at random from the fauna of the world, "or a llama, or a elephant." She rubbed her nose so hard against the glass that it gave out a squeaking sound. "Then off you go!" And rustle, rustle, rustle. Gwendolyn whirled. This was the moment, if ever, to make her wish known, to assert her will. With a running patter of slippers, she cut off Miss Royle's progress. "That tall building way, way down on the sky," she panted. "Yes, dear," with a simper. "Is that where my father is?" The smirk went. Miss Royle stared down. Why?" she asked. "'Cause," the other's look was met squarely, "'cause I'm going down there to see him." "Ah!" breathed the governess. "I'm going to day," went on Gwendolyn passionately. "I want to." Her lips trembled. "There's something " "Something you want to tell him, dear?" purringly. Confusion followed boldness. Gwendolyn dropped her chin and made reply with an inarticulate murmur. "Ahem!" coughed Miss Royal. Her hums invariably prepared the way for important pronouncements. Gwendolyn waited for all the familiar arguments. "I can't let you go until you're sent for, dear." "Your papa doesn't want to be bothered." And, "This is probably his busy day." Instead, "Has any one ever told you about that street, Gwenny?" "No," still with lowered glance. "Well, I wouldn't go down into it if I were you." The tone was full of hidden meaning. There was a moment's pause. Then, "Why not?" asked Gwendolyn, back against the door. The question was put as a challenge. She did not expect an answer. An answer came, however. "Well, I'll tell you. The street is full of bears." Gwendolyn caught her hands together in a nervous grasp. All her life she had heard about bears, and never any good of them. According to Miss Royal and Jane, these dread animals, who existed in all colors and in nearly all climes, made it their special office to eat up little girls who disobeyed. She knew where several of the beasts were harbored in cages at the Zoo, from where they sallied at the summons of outraged nurses and governesses. But as to their being down town She lifted a face tense with earnestness. "Is it true?" she asked hoarsely. "My dear," said Miss Royal, gently reproving, "ask anybody." Gwendolyn reflected. Thomas was freely given to exaggeration. Jane, at times, resorted to bald falsehood. But Gwendolyn had never found reason to doubt Miss Royal. She moved aside. The governess turned to the schoolroom mirror to take a peep at her poke, and slung the chain of her handbag across her arm. Then, "I'll be home early," she said pleasantly, and went out by the door leading into the nursery. Bears! Gwendolyn stood bewildered. Oh, why were the Zoo bears in her father's street? Did it mean that he was in danger? The thought sent her toward the nursery door. As she went, she glanced back over a shoulder uneasily. Close to the door she paused. Miss Royal was not yet gone, for there was a faint rustling in the next room. And Gwendolyn could hear the quick shush, shush, shush of her whispering, like the low purl of Johnnie Blake's trout stream. Presently, silence. Gwendolyn went in. She found Jane standing in the center of the room, mouth puckered soberly, reddish eyes winking with disquiet, apprehension in the very set of her heavy shoulders. The sight halted Gwendolyn and filled her with misgivings. Had Jane just heard? When it came time to prepare for the afternoon motor ride, Gwendolyn tested the matter, yet without repeating Miss Royal's dire statement. "Let's go past where my father's office is to day," she proposed, and tried to smile. Jane was tucking a small hand through a coat sleeve. "Well, dearie," she answered with a sigh and a shake of her red head, "you couldn't hire me to go into that street, and I wouldn't like to see you go." Gwendolyn paled. "Bears?" she asked. "Truly?" Jane made big eyes. Then, turning the slender little figure carefully about, "Gwendolyn, lovie, Jane thinks you'd better give the idear up." So it was true! Jane, who was happiest when standing in opposition to others, who was certain to defer if a difference was possible, Jane had borne it out. Moreover, she was frightened, for Gwendolyn was leaning against the nurse, and she could feel her shaking. Oh, how one terrible thing followed another! Gwendolyn felt utterly cast down. And the ride in the swift flying car only increased her dejection. For she did not even have the entertainment afforded by Thomas's enlivening company. He stayed beside the chauffeur, as he had, indeed, ever since the memorable feast of peanuts, and avoided turning his haughty black head. Jane was morose. Now and then, for no apparent reason, she sniffled. Gwendolen's mind was occupied by a terrifying series of pictures that Miss Royle's declaration called up. The central figure of each picture was her father, his safety threatened. Arrived home, she resolved upon still another course of action. She was forced to give up visiting her father at his office, but she would steal down to the grown-up part of the house, at a time other than the dinner hour, that very night. Evening fell, and she was not asked to appear in the great dining room. That strengthened her determination. However, to give a hint of it would be folly. So, while Miss Royle picked at a chop and tittered over copious draughts of tea, and Thomas chattered unrebuked, she ate her supper in silence. Ordinarily, she rebelled at being undressed. She was not sleepy, or she wanted to watch the drive, or she did not believe it was 7. There was something wrong with the clock. But supper over, and 7 o'clock on the strike, she went willingly to bed. When Gwendolyn was under the covers, and all the shades were down, Jane stepped into the schoolroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. She snapped on the lights above the schoolroom table. Then Gwendolyn heard the crackling of a newspaper. She lay thinking. Why had she not been asked to the great dining room? At 7 her father, if all were well, should be sitting down to his dinner. But was he ill to-night, or hurt? A half hour dragged past. Jane left her paper and tiptoed into the nursery. Gwendolyn did not speak or move. When the nurse approached the bed and looked down, Gwendolyn shut her eyes. Jane tiptoed out, closing the door behind her. A moment later, Gwendolyn heard another door open and shut, then the rumble of a man's deep voice, and the shriller tones of a woman. The chorus of indistinct voices made Gwendolyn sleepy. She found her eyelids drooping in spite of herself. That would never do. To keep herself awake, she got up cautiously, put on her slippers and dressing gown, stole to the front window, climbed upon the long seat, and drew aside the shade softly. The night was moonless. Clouds hid the stars. The street lamps disclosed the crescent of the Drive only dimly. Beyond the Drive, the river stretched like a smooth, wide ribbon of black satin. It undulated gently. Upon the dark water of the farther edge a procession of lights laid a fringe of gold. There were other lights, where, beyond the precipice, stood the forest houses, where moored boats rocked at a landing place upstream, and on boats that were plying past. A few lights made star spots on the cliff side. But most brilliant of all were those forming the monster letters of words. These words Gwendolyn did not pronounce, for Miss Royle, whenever she chanced to look out and see them, said, "Shameful!" or "What a disgrace!" or "Abominable!" And Gwendolyn guessed that the words were wicked. As she knelt peering out, sounds from city and river came up to her. There was the distant roll of street cars, the warning honk, honk of an automobile, the scream of a tug, and lesser sounds: feet upon the sidewalk under the window, low laughter from the dim tree-shaded walk. She wondered about her father. Suddenly there rose to her window a long-drawn cry. She recognized it, the high-keyed, monotonous cry of a man who often hurried past with a bundle of newspapers under his arm. Now it startled her. It filled her with foreboding. "Extra! Extra! All about the lubble in Street!" Street! What street? Gwendolyn strained her ears to catch the words. What if it were the street where her "Extra! Extra!" cried the voice again. It was nearer, yet the words were no clearer. "All about the lubble in Street!" He passed. His cry died in the distance. Gwendolyn let the window shade go back into place very gently. To prepare properly for her trip downstairs meant running the risk of discovery. She tiptoed noiselessly to the schoolroom door. There she listened. Thomas's deep voice was still rumbling on. Punctuating it regularly was a sniffle. And the keyhole showed a spot of glinting red Jane's hair. Gwendolyn left the schoolroom door for the one opening on the hall. In the hall were shaded lights. Light streamed up the bronze shaft. Gwendolyn put her face against the scrolls and peered down. The cage was far below, and all was still. The stairs wound their carpeted length before her. She slipped from one step to another warily, one hand on the polished banisters to steady herself, the other carrying her slippers. At the next floor she stopped before crossing the hall, to peer back over a shoulder, to peer ahead down the second flight. Outside the high carved door of the library she stopped and put on the slippers. And she could not forbear wishing that she knew which was really her best foot, so that she might put it forward. But there was no time for conjectures. She bore down with both hands on the huge knob and pressed her light weight against the panels. The heavy door swung open. She stole in. The library had 3 windows that looked upon the side street. These windows were all set together, the middle one being built out farther than the other 2, so as to form an embrasure. Over against these windows, in the shallow bow they formed, was a desk of dark wood and glass topped. It was scattered with papers and books. Before it sat her father. The moment her eyes fell upon him, she realized that she had not come any too soon. For his shoulders were bent as from a great weight. His head was bowed. His face was covered by his hands. She went forward swiftly. When she was between the desk and the windows, she stopped, but did not speak. She kept her gray eyes on those shielding hands. Presently he sighed, straightened on his chair, and looked at her. For one instant Gwendolyn did not move, though her heart beat so wildly it stirred the lace ruffles of her dressing gown. Then, remembering dancing instructions, she curtsied. A smile softened the stern lines of her father's mouth. It traveled up his cheeks in little ripples and half shut his tired eyes. He put out a hand. "Why, hello, daughter," he said wearily but fondly. She felt an almost uncontrollable desire to throw out her arms to him, to clasp his neck, to cry, "Oh, daddy, daddy! I don't want them to hurt you!" But she conquered it, her underlip in her teeth, and put a small hand in his outstretched one gravely. I heard the man calling," she began timidly, "and I thought maybe the Bear's down in your street." "Ha! The Bears!" He gave a bitter laugh. So Miss Royle had told the truth! The hand in his tightened its hold. "Have the Bears ever frightened you?" she asked, her voice trembling. He did not answer at once, but put his head on one side and looked at her for a full half minute. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said. "Yes, dear. Once or twice." She had planned to spy out at least a strap of the harness he wore, to examine closely what sort of candles, if any, he burned in the seclusion of the library. Now she forgot to do either, could not have seen if she had tried, for her eyes were swimming, blinding her. She swayed nearer him. If you'd take Thomas along in your car," she suggested chokingly. "He hunted elephants once, and I don't need him." Her father rose. He was not looking at her, but away, beyond the bowed windows, though the shades of these were drawn, the hangings were in place. And, "No," he said hoarsely. "Not yet. I'm not through fighting them yet." "Daddy!" Fear for him wrung the cry from her. His eyes fell to her upturned face, and as if he saw the terror there, he knelt, suddenly all concern. "Who told you about the Bears, Gwendolyn?" with a note of displeasure. "Miss Royle." "That was wrong. She shouldn't have done it. There are things a little girl can't understand." His eyes were on a level with her brimming ones. The next moment, "Gwendolyn! Gwendolyn! "Oh, where's that child?" The voice was Jane's. She was pounding her way down the stairs. Before Gwendolyn could put a finger to his lips to plead for silence, "Here, Jane!" he called, and stood up once more. Jane came in, puffing with her haste. "Oh, thank you, sir!" she cried. "It give me such a turn, her stealin' off like that. Madam doesn't like her to be up late, as she well knows. And I'll be blamed for this, sir, though I take pains to follow out Madam's orders exact." She seized Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn, eyes dry now, and defiant, pulled back with all the strength of her slender arm. "Oh, fath er!" she pled. "Oh, please! I don't want to go." "Why?" It was reproval, but tender reproval mixed with mild amazement. "Oh, I want to tell you something!" cried Gwendolyn. "Let me stay just a minute." "That's just the way she acts, sir, whenever it's bedtime," mourned Jane. He leaned to lift Gwendolyn's chin gently. "Father thinks she'd better go now," he said quietly. "And she's not to worry her blessed baby head any more." Then he kissed her. The kiss, the knowledge that strife was futile, the sadness of parting, these brought the great sobs. She went without resisting, but stumbling a little. The back of one hand was laid against her streaming eyes. Half a flight up the stairs, Jane turned her right about at a bend. Then she dropped the hand to look over the banisters. And through a blur of tears saw her father watching after her, his shoulders against the library door. He threw a kiss. Then another bend of the staircase hid his upturned face. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Poor Little Rich Girl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan Umpleby. The Poor Little Rich Girl by Eleanor Gates, Chapter 6. Gwendolyn was lying on her back in the middle of the nursery floor. The skein of her flaxen hair streamed about her shoulders in tangles. Her head being unpillowed, her face was pink. And pink, too, with wrath. Her blue and white frock was crumpled. She was kicking the rug with both heels. It was noon, and Miss Royle was having her dinner. Her face, usually so pale, was dark with anger held well in check. Her expression was that of one who had recently suffered a scare, and her faded eyes shifted here and there uneasily. Thomas, too, looked apprehensive as he moved between table and tray. Jane was just gone, showing, as she disappeared, lips nervously pursed, and a red, roving glance that betokened worry. Gwendolyn, watching out from under the arm that rested across her forehead, realized how her last night's breach of authority had impressed each one of them. And secretly rejoicing at her triumph, she kept up a brisk tattoo. Miss Royle ignored her. "I'll take a little more chocolate, Thomas," she said, with a fair semblance of calm. But cup and saucer rattled in her hand. Thomas, too, feigned indifference to the rat tat tat of heels. He bent above the table attentively. And to Gwendolyn was wafted down a sweet aroma. "Thank you," said Miss Royle. "And cake, too? Splendid! How did you manage it?" A knife edge cut against china. She helped herself generously. Gwendolyn fell silent to listen. "Well, I haven't Mr. Potter to thank," said Thomas warmly. "Only my own forethoughtedness, as you might say. The first time I ever set eyes on it, I seen it was the kind that'd keep so." From under the shielding arm Gwendolyn blinked with indignation. Her birthday cake! "Say, Miss Royle," chuckled Thomas, replenishing the chocolate cup, "that was a awful whack you give Miss J last night." At once Gwendolyn forgot the wrong put upon her in the matter of the cake, in astonishment at this new turn of affairs. Evidently Miss Royle and Thomas were leagued against Jane. The governess nodded importantly. "She was only a cook before she came here," she declared contemptuously. "Down at the employment agency where Madam got her, they said so. The common two faced thing!" This last was said with much vindictiveness. Following it, she proffered Thomas the cake plate. "Thanks," said he. "I don't mind if I do have a slice." Now, of a sudden, wrath and resentment possessed Gwendolyn, sweeping her like a wave at seeing her cake portioned out, at having her kicking ignored, at hearing these two openly abuse Jane. "I want some strawberries," she stormed, pounding the rug full force. "And an egg. I won't eat dry bread. Bang! Bang! Bang!" Miss Royle half turned. "Did you ask to go down to the library?" she inquired. She seemed totally undisturbed, yet her eyes glittered. "Did she ask?" snorted Thomas. "She's gettin' very forward, she is." "Now you knew better," went on Miss Royle. "You knew I wouldn't permit you to bother your father when he didn't want you." "He did want me," choking with a sob. "Think," resumed the governess, inflecting her tones eloquently, "of the fortune he spends on your dresses, and your pony, and your beautiful car. And he hires all of us," she swept a gesture, "to wait on you, you naughty girl, and try to make a little lady out of you. I hate ladies!" cried Gwendolyn, rapping her heels by way of emphasis. "Tale bearing is vulgar," asserted Miss Royle. "Next year I'm going to day school like Johnnie Blake." "Oh, hush your nonsense!" commanded Thomas, irritably. Miss Royle glanced up at him. "That will do," she snapped. He bridled up. "What the little imp needs is a good paddlin'," he declared. "Well, you have nothing to do with the disciplining of the child. That is my business." "It's what she needs, all the same. The very idear of her bawlin' all the morning at the top of her lungs." "I did not at the top of my lungs," contradicted Gwendolyn. "I cried with my mouth." "So's the whole house can hear," continued Thomas. "And beatin' about the floor. It's clear shameful, I say, and enough to give a sensitive person the nerves. As I remarked to Jane only " "You remark too many things to Jane," interposed the governess curtly. Now he sobered. "I hope you ain't displeased with me," he ventured. "Ain't displeased?" repeated Miss Royle, more than ever fretful. "Oh, Thomas, do stop murdering the King's English." At that Gwendolyn sat up, shook back her hair, and raised a startled face to the row of toys in the glass fronted case. Murdering the King's English! Had he dared to harm her soldier with the scarlet coat? "I was urgin' your betterin', too, Miss Royle," reminded Thomas gently. "I says to Jane, I says " The soldier was in his place, safe. Relieved, Gwendolyn straightened out once more on her back. "The whole lot of us ought to be paid higher wages than we're gettin', for it's a real trial to have to be under the same roof with such a provokin' " Miss Royle interrupted by vigorously bobbing her head. "Oh, that I have to make my living this way!" she exclaimed, voice deep with mournfulness. "I'd rather wash dishes. I'd rather scrub floors. I'd rather starve." Something in the vehemence, or in the cadence of Miss Royle's declaration, again gave Gwendolyn that sense of triumph. With a sudden curling up of her small nose, she giggled. Miss Royal whirled with a rustle of silk skirts. "Gwendolyn," she said threateningly, "if you're going to act like that, I shall know there's something the matter with you, and I shall certainly call a doctor." Gwendolyn lay very still. As Thomas glanced down at her, smirking exultantly, her smile went, and the pink of wrath once more surged into her face. "And the doctor'll give nasty medicine," declared Thomas. "Or maybe he'll cut out your appendix." "Potter won't let him." "Potter! Ha! He'll cut out your appendix and charge your papa $1,000. Oh, you bet! Them that's naughty always pays the piper." Gwendolyn got to her feet. "I won't pay the piper," she retorted. "I'm going to give all my money to the hand organ man. All of it. I like him," tauntingly, "but I hate you." "We hate a sneak," observed Miss Royal blandly. The little figure went rigid. "And I hate you!" she cried shrilly. Then buried her face in her hands. "Gwendolyn!" It was a solemn and horrified warning. Gwendolyn turned and walked slowly toward the window seat. Her breast was heaving. "Come back and sit in this chair," bade the governess. Gwendolyn paused, but did not turn. "Shall I fetch you?" "Can't I even look out of the window?" burst forth Gwendolyn. "Oh, you She yearned to say snake in the grass, yet dared not. "You mean mean!" Her voice rose to a scream. Miss Royal stood up. "I see that you want to go to bed," she declared. The torrent of Gwendolyn's anger and resentment surged and broke bounds. She pivoted, arms tossing, face aflame. There were those wicked words across the river that each night burned themselves upon the dark. She had never pronounced them aloud before, but "Starch!" she shrilled, stamping a foot. "Philicites! Borax! Shirts!" Miss Royal gave Thomas a worried stare. He in turn fixed her with a look of alarm. So much Gwendolyn saw before she flung herself down again, sobbing aloud, but tearlessly, her cheek upon the rug. She heard Miss Royal rustle toward the school room, heard Thomas close the door leading into the hall. There were times the nursery had seen a few when the trio found it well to leave her severely alone. Now only a hoarse lamenting broke the quiet. It was an hour later when some one tapped on the school room door. Miss French, doubtless, since it was her allotted time. The lamentations swelled then, and grew fainter only when the last footfall died away on the stairs. Then Gwendolyn slept. Awakening, she lay and watched out through the upper panes of the front window. Across the square of serene blue framed by curtains and casing, small clouds were drifting clouds dazzlingly white. She pretended the clouds were fat, snowy sheep that were passing one by one. Thus had snowy flocks crossed above the trout stream. Oh, where was that stream? The glade through which it flowed? The shingled cottage among the trees? With all her heart, Gwendolyn wished she were a butterfly. Suddenly she sat up. She had found her way alone to the library. Why not put on hat and coat and go to Johnnie Blake's? She was at the door of the wardrobe before she remembered the kidnapers, and realized that she dared not walk out alone. But Potter liked the country. Besides, he knew the way. She decided to ask him to go with her, old and stooped though he was. Perhaps she would also take the pretty nurse maid at the corner. And those who were left behind, Miss Royal and Thomas and Jane, would all be sorry when she was gone. But let them fret, let them weep, and wish her back. She That moment she caught sight of the photographs on the writing desk. She stood still to look at them. As she looked, both pictured faces gradually dimmed, for tears had come at last at the thought of leaving father and mother. Quiet tears that flowed in erratic little S's between gray eyes and trembling mouth. How could she forsake them? "Gwendolyn," she half whispered, "suppose we just play the Johnnie Blake Pretend." "Oh, very well." This last with all of Miss Royle's precise intonation. The heavy brocade hangings were the forest trees. The piano was the mountain, richly inlaid. The table was the cottage. And she rolled it nearer the dull rose timber at the side window. The rug was the grassy, flowery glade, its border the stream that threaded the glade. Beyond the stream twisted an unpaved and carefully polished road. The first part of this particular Pretend was the drive to the village, carved and enameled, and paneled with woven cane. A hassock did duty for a runabout that had no top to shut out the sunlight, no windows to bar the fragrant air. In front of the hassock, a pillow did duty as a stout, dappled pony. Her father drove, and she sat beside him, holding on to the iron bar of the runabout seat with one hand, to a corner of his coat with the other. For not only were the turns sharp, but the country road was uneven. The sun was just rising above the forest, and it warmed her little back. The fresh breeze caressed her cheeks into crimson, and swirled her hair about the down sloping brim of her wreath encircled hat. That breeze brought with it the perfume of opening flowers, the fragrance exhaled by the trees along the way, the essence of the damp ground stirred by hoof and wheel. Gwendolyn breathed through nostrils swelled to their widest. Following the drive to the village came the trip up the stream to Trout pools. Gwendolyn's father led the way with basket and reel. She trotted at his heels. And beside Gwendolyn trotted Johnnie Blake. The piano seat was Johnnie. His eyes were blue and full of laughter. His small nose was as freckled as Jane's. His brown hair disposed itself in several rough heaps, as if it had been winnowed by a tiny whirlwind. "Good morning," said Gwendolyn, curtsying. "Hello!" returned Johnnie, while Gwendolyn smiled at herself in the pier glass. Johnnie carried a long willow fishing pole cut from the stream side. Reel he had none, nor basket, and he did not own a belted outing suit of hunter's green and high buckled boots. He wore a plaid gingham waist, starched so stiff that its round collar stood up and tickled his ears. His hat was of straw, and somewhat ragged. His brown jeans overalls, riveted and suspendered, reached to bare ankles fully as brown. The overalls were provided with 3 pockets. Bulging one was his round tin drinking cup, which was full of worms. "Are there p'licemen in these woods?" inquired Gwendolyn. "Nope," said Johnnie. "Are there bears?" "Nope." "Are there doctors?" "Nope. But there's snakes some." "Oh, I'm not afraid of snakes. I've got one at home. It's long and black, and it's got a wooden tongue." "'Fraid to go barefoot?" "Oh, I wish I could." Here she glanced over a shoulder toward the school room. Then toward the hall. Did she dare? "Well, you're little yet," explained Johnnie. "But just you wait till you grow up." "Are you grown up?" a trifle doubtfully. "Of course I'm grown up. Why, I'm 7." Whereat she strode up and down, hands on hips, in feeble imitation of Johnnie. But here the inclination for further make believe died utterly. At a point where, usually, Johnnie threw back his head with a triumphant laugh, gave a squirrel like leap into the air (from the top of the nursery table), caught the lower branch of a tall, slim tree (the chandelier), and swung himself to and fro with joyous abandon. For Gwendolyn suddenly remembered the cruel truth borne out by the ink line on the pier glass. And instead of climbing upon the table, she went to stand in front of her writing desk. "I was 7 my last birthday," she murmured, looking up at the rose embossed calendar. 7 and grown up, and yet everything was just the same. She went to the front window and knelt on the cushioned seat. Across the river red smoke was pouring up from those chimneys on the water's edge that were assuredly a mile high. Red smoke meant that evening was approaching. Jane would enter soon. With 2 in the nursery, the advantage was for her who did not have to make the overtures of peace. She turned her back to the room. Jane came. She drew the heavy curtains at the side window, and busied herself in the vicinity of the bed, moving about quietly, saying not a word. Presently she went out. Gwendolyn faced round. The bed was arranged for the night. At its head, on the small table, was a glass of milk, a sandwich, a cup of broth, a plate of cooked fruit. The western sky faded to gray, to deep blue, to jade. The river flowed jade beneath. Along it the light sprang up. Then came the stars. Gwendolyn worked at the buttons of her slippers. The tears were falling again. But not tears of anger or resentment, only of loneliness, of yearning. The little white and blue frock fastened down the front. She undid it, weeping softly the while, found her night dress, put it on, and climbed into bed. The food was close at hand. She did not touch it. She was not hungry, only worn from her day long combat. She lay back among the pillows. And as she looked up at the stars, each sent out gay little flashes of light to every side. "Oh, Mother," she mourned, "everybody hates me! Everybody hates me!" Then came a comforting thought. She would play the dearest pretend. It was easy to make believe that a girlish figure was seated in the dark beside the bed, that a tender face was bending down, a gentle hand touching the troubled forehead, stroking the tangled hair. "Oh, I want you all the time, Mother." "And I want you, my precious baby." "How much do you love me, Mother?" "Love you? Oh, as big as the sky." "Dear Mother, may I eat at the grown up table?" "All the time, sweetheart." "Goody! And we'll just let Miss Royle eat with Jane, and " She caught a stealthy rustle, rustle, rustle from the direction of the hall. She spoke more low then, but continued to chatter, her pretend conversation loving, confidential, and consoling. Finally, "Mother," she pled, "will you please sing?" She sang. Her voice was husky from crying. More than once it quavered and broke. But the song was one she had heard in the long raftered living room at Johnnie Blake's, and it soothed. "Oh, it is not while beauty and youth are thine own, and thy cheek is unstained by a tear, that the fervor and faith of a soul can be known." It grew faint. It ended in a long sigh. Then one small hand in the gentle make believe grasp of another, she slept. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Poor Little Rich Girl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Poor Little Rich Girl, by Eleanor Gates. Chapter 7 Miss Royal looked sober as she sipped her orange juice. And she cut off the top of her breakfast egg as noiselessly as possible. Her directions to Thomas she half whispered, or merely signaled them by a wave of her coffee spoon. Now and then she glanced across the room to the white and gold bed. Then she beamed fondly. As for Thomas, he fairly stole from tray to table, from table to tray, his face all concern. Occasionally, if his glance followed Miss Royal's, he smiled a broad, sympathetic smile. And Jane was subdued and solicitous. She sat beside the bed, holding a small hand, which from time to time she patted encouragingly. After the storm, calm. The more tempestuous the storm, the more perfect the calm. This was the rule of the nursery. Gwendolyn, lying among the pillows, wished she could always feel weak and listless. It made every one so kind. "Thomas," said Miss Royal, as she folded her napkin and rustled to her feet, "you may call up the riding school, and say that Miss Gwendolyn will not ride to day." "Yes, ma'am." "And Jane, you may go out for the morning. I shall stay here." "Thanks," acknowledged Jane, in a tone quite unusual for her. She did not rise, however, but waited, striving to catch Thomas's eye. "And Thomas," went on the governess, "when would you like an hour?" Thomas advanced with a bow of appreciation. "If it's all the same to you, Miss Royal," said he, "I'll have a bit of an errand directly after supper this evening." Jane glared. "Very well." Miss Royal rustled toward the school room, taking a survey of herself in the pier glass as she went. "Jane," she added, "you will be free to go in half an hour." She threw Gwendolyn a loud kiss. Thomas was directing his attention to the clearing of the breakfast table. The moment the door closed behind the governess, Jane shot up from her chair and advanced upon him. "You ain't treatin' me fair," she charged, speaking low but breathing fast. "You ain't takin' your hours off duty along with me no more. You're givin' me the cold shoulder." At that, Gwendolyn turned her head to look. Of late she had heard not a few times of Thomas's cold shoulder this and heated encounters between him and Jane. She wondered which of his shoulders was the cold one. Thomas lifted his upper lip in a sneer. "Indeed!" he replied. "I'm not treatin' you fair? Well," with meaning, "I didn't think you was botherin' your head about anybody except a certain policeman." Back jerked Jane's chin. "Can't I have a gentleman friend?" she demanded defensively. "Ha! Ha! Gentleman friend!" Then, addressing no one in particular, "My! But don't a uniform take a woman's eye!" "Why, Thomas!" It was a sorrowful protest. "You misjudge. You really do." So far there was no fresh element in the misunderstanding. Thus the two argued time and again. Gwendolyn almost knew their quarrel by heart. But now Thomas came round upon Jane with a snarl. "You're not foolin' me," he declared. "Don't you think I know that policeman's heels over head?" He shook his crumb knife at her. "Heels over head!" Then, seizing the tray and swinging it up, he stalked out. Jane fell to pacing the floor. Her reddish eyes roved angrily. Heels over head! Gwendolyn, pondering, now watched the nurse, now looked across to where, on its shelf, was poised the toy somersault man. If one of the uniformed men she dreaded was heels over head But Jane "Well? Well?" "I saw the p'liceman walking on his feet yesterday." Hush your silly talk!" Gwendolyn hushed, her gray eyes wistful, her mouth drooping. The morning had been so peaceful. Now Jane had spoken the first rough word. Peace returned with Miss Royle, who came in with the morning paper, dismissed Jane, and settled down in the upholstered chair, silver rimmed spectacles on nose. The brocade hangings of the front window were only partly drawn. Between them, Gwendolyn made out more of those fat sheep straying down the azure field of the sky. She lay very still and counted them, and counting, slept, but restlessly, with eyes only half shut and nervous starts. Awakening at noon, the listlessness was gone, and she felt stronger. Her eyes were bright, too. There was a faint color in cheeks and lips. "Miss Royle!" "Yes, darling?" The governess leaned forward attentively. "I can understand why you call Thomas a footman. It's 'cause he runs around so much on his feet." "You're better," said Miss Royle. She turned her paper inside out. "But one day you said he was all ears and "Gwendolyn!" Miss Royle stared down over her glasses. "Never repeat what you hear me say, love. It's tattling. And tattling is ill bred. Now, what can I give you?" Gwendolyn wanted a drink of water. When Thomas appeared with the dinner tray, he gave an impressive wag of the head. "What do you think I've got for you?" he asked, while Miss Royle propped Gwendolyn to a sitting position. Gwendolyn did not try to guess. She was not interested. She had no appetite. Thomas brought forward a silver dish. "It's a bird," he announced, and lifted the cover. Gwendolyn looked. It was a small bird, richly browned. A tiny sprig of parsley garnished it on either side. A ribbon of bacon lay in crisp flutings across it. Its short round legs were upthrust. On the end of each was a paper frill. "Don't it look delicious?" said Thomas warmly. "Don't it tempt?" But Gwendolyn regarded it without enthusiasm. "What kind of a bird is it?" she asked. Thomas displayed a second dish, Bermuda potatoes the size of her own small fist. "Who knows?" said he. "It might be a robin. It might be a plover. It might be a quail." "It might be a talking bird," said Gwendolyn. She poked the bird with a fork. "Not likely," declared Thomas. Gwendolyn turned away. "Ain't it to your likin'?" asked Thomas, surprised. He did not take the plate at once, in his usual fashion. "I don't want anything," she declared. "Oh, but maybe you'd fancy an egg." Gwendolyn took a glass of water. "It's just as well," said Miss Royle. When she resigned her place presently, she talked to Jane in undertones, so that Gwendolyn could hear only disconnectedly. Think it would be the safest thing. "She gets any worse never do, Jane. Find out by themselves. She won't be home till late to night. Some grand affair. But he though of course I'm sorry to have to." The moment Miss Royle was well away, Jane had a plan. "I think you're getting on so fine that you can hop up and dress," she declared, noting how the gray eyes sparkled, and how pink were the round spots on Gwendolyn's cheeks. Gwendolyn had nothing to say. Jane ran to the wardrobe and took out a dress. It was a new one, of cream white wool, and on a sleeve, as well as on the corners of the sailor collar and the tips of the broad tie, scarlet anchors were embroidered. Gwendolyn smiled. But it was not the anchors that charmed forth the smile. It was a pocket, set like a shield on the blouse, an adorable patch pocket. "Oh!" she cried. "Did They make me that pocket? Jane, how sweet!" "1, 2, 3," said Jane briskly, "and we'll have this on. Let's see by the clock how quick you can jump into it." The clock was a familiar method of inducing Gwendolyn to do hastily something she had not thought of doing at all. She shook her head. "Why, it'd do you good, pettie." This coaxingly. "It's too warm to dress," said Gwendolyn. Jane flung the garment back into the wardrobe without troubling to hang it up, and banged the wardrobe door. But she did not again broach the subject of getting up. A hint of uneasiness betrayed itself in her manner. She took a chair by the bed. Gwendolyn's whole face was gradually taking on a deep flush. For those flaming spots on her cheeks were spreading to throat and temples, to her very hair. She kept her hands in constant motion. Next the small tongue began to babble uninterruptedly. It was the over lively talking that made Jane certain that Gwendolyn was ill. She leaned to feel of the busy hands, the throbbing forehead. Then she hastily telephoned Thomas. "Have we any more of that quietin' medicine?" she asked as he opened the door. "It's all gone. Why?" The two forgot their differences, and bent over Gwendolyn. She smiled up and nodded. "All the clouds in the sky are filled with wind," she declared, "like automobile tires. Toy balloons are, I know. Once I put a pin in one, and the wind blew right out. I suppose the clouds in the south hold the south wind, and the clouds in the north hold the north wind, and the clouds " "Jane," said Thomas, "we've got to have a doctor." Gwendolyn heard. She saw Jane spring to the telephone. The next instant, with a piercing scream that sent her canary fluttering to the top of its cage, she flung herself sideways. "Jane! Oh, don't! Jane! He'll kill me! Jane!" Jane fell back and caught Gwendolyn in her arms. The little figure was all a tremble. Both hands were beating the air in wild protest. "Jane! Oh, I'll be good! I'll be good!" She hid her face against the nurse, shuddering. "But you're sick, lovie. And a doctor will make you well. There! There! Listen to Jane, dearie." Thomas laid an anxious hand on the yellow head. "The doctor won't hurt you," he declared. "He only gives bread pills, anyhow." "No!" She flung herself back upon the bed, catching at the pillows as if to hide beneath them, writhing pitifully, moaning, beseeching with terrified eyes. Jane and Thomas stared helplessly at each other, their faces guilty and frightened. "Dearie!" cried Jane. "Hush, and we won't. Oh, Thomas, I'm fairly distracted. Pettie, we won't have the doctor." Gradually Gwendolyn quieted. Then carefully, and by degrees, Jane approached the matter of medical aid in a new way. "We'll just telephone," she declared. "We won't let any old doctor come here not a bit of it. We'll ask him to send something. Is that all right? Please, darlin'." Reluctantly Gwendolyn yielded. "The medicine'll be awful nasty," she faltered. To that Jane made no reply. Her every freckle was standing out clearly. Her reddish eyes bulged. She hunted a number in the telephone directory with fumbling fingers. After which she held the receiver to her ear with a shaking hand. "Everything's going wrong," she mourned. Huddled into a little ball, and still as a frightened bird, Gwendolyn listened to the message. "Hello! Hello! Is this the doctor speakin'? Oh, this is Miss Gwendolyn's nurse, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Miss Gwendolyn's a little nervous to day, sir. Not sick enough to call you in, sir, but I was going to ask if you couldn't send something soothin'. She's been cryin' like, that's all. Yes, sir, and wakeful." "A little hysterical yesterday," prompted Thomas, in a low voice. "A little hysterical yesterday," went on Jane. "Yes, sir, by messenger. I'll be most careful, sir. Thank you, sir." Jane and Thomas combined to make the remainder of the afternoon less dull. One by one the favorite toys came down from the second shelf. And a miniature circus took place on the rug beside the bed a circus in which each toy played a part. Gwendolyn's fear was charmed away. She laughed, and drank copious draughts of water delicious bubbling water that Thomas poured from tall bottles. Jane had her own supper beside the white and gold bed coffee and a sandwich only. Gwendolyn still had no appetite, but seemed almost her usual self once more. So much so that when she asked questions, Jane was cross, and counseled immediate sleep. "But I'm not a bit sleepy," declared Gwendolyn. "It'll be moonlight after a while, Jane. May I look out at the downtown roofs?" "You may stop your botherin'," retorted Jane, "and make up your mind to go to sleep. You've give me a awful day. Now try just 40 winks." "Why do you always say 40?" inquired Gwendolyn. "Couldn't I take 41?" "Hush!" After supper came the medicine a dark liquid. Gwendolyn eyed it anxiously. Thomas was gone. Jane opened the bottle and measured a teaspoonful into a drinking glass. "Do I have to take it now?" asked Gwendolyn. "To morrow you'll wake up as good as new," asserted Jane. She touched her tongue with a spoon, then smacked her lips. "Why, dearie, it's " She was interrupted. From the direction of the side window there came a burst of instrumental music. With it, singing the words of a waltz from a popular opera, blended a thin, cracked voice. Before Jane could put out a restraining hand, Gwendolyn bounced to her knees. "Oh, it's the old hand organ man!" she cried. "It's the old hand organ man! Oh, where's some money? I want to give him some money." Jane threw up both hands wildly. "Oh, did I ever have such luck!" she exclaimed. Then, between her teeth, and pressing Gwendolyn back upon the pillows, "You lay down or I'll shake you." "Oh, please let him stay just this time," begged Gwendolyn. "I like him, Jane." "I'll stay him," promised Jane grimly. She marched to the side window, threw up the sash, and leaned out. "Here, you!" she called down roughly. "You git!" "Oh, Jane!" pled Gwendolyn. The thin, cracked voice fell silent. The waltz slowed its tempo, then came to a gasping stop. "How's a body to git a child to sleep with that old wheeze of yours goin'?" demanded Jane. "We don't want you here. Move along." "He could play me to sleep," protested Gwendolyn. A reply to Jane's order was shrilled up something defiant. "He'd only excite you, darlin'," declared Jane. She was on her knees at the window, and turned her head to speak. "I can't have that rumpus in the street with you so nervous." Gwendolyn sighed. "Take your medicine, dearie," went on Jane. She stayed where she was. Promptly Gwendolyn sat up and reached for the glass. To hold it, to shake it about, and potter in the strange liquid with a spoon, would be some compensation for having to drink it. "If that mean old creature didn't make faces!" grumbled Jane. She was leaning forward to look out. "How did he make faces, Jane?" asked Gwendolyn. "Were they nice ones?" She lifted the glass to take a whiff of its contents. "I'd like to see him make faces." She put the spoon into Jane's half empty coffee cup, then let the medicine run up the side of the glass until it was almost to her lips. She tasted it. It tasted good. She hesitated a second, then drained the glass. The street was quiet. Jane rose to her feet and came over. "Did you do as I said?" she asked. "Yes, Jane." "Now, did you?" Jane picked up the glass, looked into it, then at Gwendolyn. "Honest?" "Yes, every sip." "Gwendolyn!" Jane held her with doubting eyes. "I don't believe it." "But I did." Gwendolyn bent down to the cup, sniffed it, then smelled of the glass. "Gwendolyn," she said solemnly, "I know you did not take your medicine. You poured it into this cup." "But I didn't." "I seen." Jane pointed an accusing finger. "How could you?" demanded Gwendolyn. "You were looking at the brick house." "I've got eyes in the back of my head. And I seen you plain when I was lookin' straight the other way." "Aw!" laughed Gwendolyn skeptically. "They're hid by my braids," went on Jane, "but they're there. And I seen you throw away that medicine, you bad girl." Again she leaned to examine the coffee cup. "Miss Royle said you had two faces," admitted Gwendolyn. She stared hard at the coiled braids on the back of Jane's head. The braids were pinned close together. No pair of eyes was visible. Jane straightened resolutely, seized the medicine bottle and the spoon, poured out a second dose, and proffered it. "Come now," she said firmly. "You ain't a goin' to get ahead of me with your cuteness. Take this and go to sleep." "But " That moment a shrill whistle sounded from the street. "There now!" cried Jane triumphantly. "The policeman's right here. I can call him up whenever I like." Gwendolyn drank. Jane tossed the spoon aside, corked the bottle, and went back to the open window. "You go to sleep," she commanded. Gwendolyn, lying flat, was murmuring to herself. "Ooh, how funny!" she said. "Ooh." "Now don't let me hear another word out of you," warned Jane. Gwendolyn turned her head slowly from side to side. A great light of some kind was flaming against her eyes. A light shot through and through with black whirling balls. Where did it come from? It stayed and grew. Her eyes widened with wonderment. A smile curved her lips. Then suddenly she rose to a sitting posture, threw out both arms, and gave a little choking cry. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Poor Little Rich Girl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan Umpleby. The Poor Little Rich Girl by Eleanor Gates, Chapter 8. It was a cry of amazement. For suddenly, so suddenly that she did not have time to think how it had happened, she found herself up and dressed, and standing alone, gazing about her, in the open air. But there were no high buildings on any side, no people passing to and fro, no motor cars flashing by. And the grass underfoot was not the grass of a lawn, evenly cut and flowerless. It was tall so that it brushed the hem of her dress, and blossom dotted. She looked up at the sky. It was not the sky of the city, distant and marbled with streaks of smoke. It was close and clear, starless too, and no moon hung upon it. Yet though it was night, there was light everywhere, warm, glowing, roseate. By that radiant glow she saw that she was in the midst of trees. Some were tall and slender and clean barked. Others were low and thick of trunk, but with the wide, shapely spread of the great banyan in her geography. And, towering above the others, were the giants of that forest, unevenly branched, misshapen, aslant, and rugged with wart like burls. Is this the park?" she said aloud, still looking around. Or the woods across the river?" But there was no sign of a paved walk, such as traced patterns through the park, nor of a chimney to mark the whereabouts of a house. Behind her the ground sloped gently up to a wooded rise. In front of her it sloped as gently down to the edge of a narrow, noisy mountain stream. "Why, I'm at Johnnie Blake's!" she cried, then glanced over a shoulder cautiously. If this were indeed the place she had longed to revisit, it would be advisable to keep as quiet as possible, lest some one should hear her, and straightway come to take her home. Still watching backward apprehensively, she pushed through the grass to the edge of the stream. The moment she reached it she knew that it was not the trout stream along which she had wandered while her father fished. It was, in fact, not ordinary water at all, but something lighter, more sparkling with color, swifter and louder. It effervesced so that a creamy mist lay along its surface, this the smoke of bursting bubbles. It was like the bottled water she drank at her nursery meals. Hands clasped, she leaned to stare down. "Isn't it funny?" she exclaimed half under her breath. A voice answered her from close at hand. It was a thin, cracked voice. "This is where They get their soda water," it said. She turned and saw him. He was a queer, little, old, thick set, dark skinned gentleman, with grizzled whiskers, a ragged hat, and baggy trousers. His eyes were round and black under his brows, which were square and long haired, and not unlike a certain new hand brush that Jane wielded of a morning across Gwendolyn's small finger tips. Over one shoulder by a strap hung a dark box, half hidden by a piece of old carpet. In one hand he held a huge curved knife. Though she could not remember ever having seen him at Johnnie Blake's, and though the curved knife was in pattern the true type of a kidnaper's weapon, and the look out of those round, dark eyes as he strode toward her was not at all friendly, she did not scamper away. She waited, her heart beating hard. When he halted, she curtsied. "I've always wondered about soda water," she faltered, trying to smile. "But when I asked he grunted. Then, with a sidewise jerk of the head, "Take a drink." She lifted eager eyes. "All I want to?" she half whispered. He nodded. "Sip, lap, tipple." "Ooh!" Fairly beaming with delight, she knelt down. For the first time in her life she could have all the soda water she wanted. First she put the tip of one finger into the rushing sparkle, slowly, to lengthen out her joy. Next, with a little laugh, she sank her whole hand. Bubbles formed upon it, all sizes of them, standing out like dewdrops upon leaves. The bubbles cooled, and tempted her thirst. With a deep breath she bent forward until her red mouth touched the shimmering surface. Thus, lying prone, with arms spread wide, she drank deep of the flow. When she straightened and sat back upon her heels, she made an astonishing discovery. The trees that studded the slope were not covered with leaves like ordinary trees. Each branched to hold lights, myriads of lights. Some of these shone steadily. Others burned with a hissing sound. Others were silent enough, but rose and fell, jumped and flickered. It was these countless lights that illumed the forest like a pink sun. She rose. There was wonder in the gray eyes. "Are these Christmas trees?" she said. "Where am I?" "You've had your soda water," he answered shortly. "You ought to know." "Yes, I ought to know. But I don't." He grunted. "I s'pose," she ventured timidly, "that nobody ever answers questions here, either." He looked uncomfortable. "Yes," he retorted, "everybody does." "Then," advancing an eager step, "why don't you?" He mopped his forehead. "Well, if I must, I must. This is where all the lights go when they're put out at night." "Oh!" And now as she glanced from tree to tree, she saw that what he had said was true. For the greater part of the lights were electric bulbs, while many were gas jets, and a few kerosene flames. Still marveling, her look chanced to fall upon herself. And she found that she was not wearing a despised muslin frock. Her dress was gingham, an adorable plaid with long sleeves and a patch pocket low down on the right side. "You darling!" she exclaimed happily, and thrust a hand into the pocket. "I guess they made it." Next she looked down at her feet, and could scarcely believe. She had on no stockings. She did not even have on slippers. She was barefoot. Then, still fearful that there was some mistake about it all, she put a hand to her head and found her hair bow gone. In its place, making a small, floppy double knot, was a length of black shoestring. "Oh, goody!" she cried. Grunted the little old gentleman. "And you can play in the water if you'd like to." That needed no urging. She was face about on the instant. From the standpoint of messing, the soda stream was ideal. It brawled around flat rocks, set at convenient jumping distances from one another. She leaped promptly to one of these and sopped her handkerchief. It circled into sand bottom pools just shallow enough for wading. And from the pools it spread out thinly to thread the grass, thus giving her an opportunity for squashing, a diverting pastime consisting in squirting equal parts of water and soil ticklishly through the toes. She hopped from rock to pool. She splashed from pool to long, wet, muddy grass. It was the water play that brought the realization of all her new good fortune: the being out of doors and plainly clad, free from the espionage of a governess, away from the tyranny of a motor car, barefoot, and, chief blessing of all, nurseless. Forgetting the little old gentleman, in a sudden excess of glee she seized a stick and bestrode it, seized another and belabored the quarters of a stout dappled pony, pranced, reared, kicked up her wet feet, shied wildly. Then, both sticks cast aside, she began to dance. At first with deliberation, holding out the gingham dress at either side, and mincing through the steps taught by Monsieur Tellegen. But gradually she forsook rhythm and measure. Capering ceased. The dance became fast and furious. Hallooing, she raced hither and thither among the trees, tossing her arms, darting down at the flowers and flinging them high, swishing her yellow hair from side to side, leaping exultantly toward the lights, pivoting. Suddenly she found that she was dancing to music, not the laboriously strummed notes of a piano, such as were beaten out by the firm striding Miss Brown, not the clamorous, deafening, tuneless efforts of an orchestra. This was real music, inviting, inspiring, heavenly. It was a hand organ. She halted spellbound. He was playing, turning the crank with a swift, steady motion, his ragged hat tipped to one side. Now she understood the box hanging from its strap. She danced up to him and held out a hand. "Why, you're the hand organ man!" she panted breathlessly. "And you got here as quick as I did." He stopped playing. "I'm the hand organ man when I'm in town," he corrected. "Here in the Land of the Lights, I'm the Man Who Makes Faces." The Man Who Makes Faces! She looked at him with new interest. "Why, of course you are," she acknowledged. "Sometimes you make 'em in town." "Sometimes in town I make an ugly one," he retorted. Whereupon he shouldered the hand organ, grasped the curved knife, and started away. As he walked, he called aloud to every side, like a huckster. "Here's where you get your ears sharpened," he sang. "Ears sharpened, eyes sharpened, edges taken off of tongues." She trotted beside him, head up, gray eyes wide, lips parted. He was ascending a gentle rise toward a low hill not far distant. As she drew away from the stream and the glade, she heard, from somewhere far behind, a shrill voice. It called a name strangely familiar. She paid no heed. At the summit of the little hill, under some trees, he paused, and waved the kidnaper knife in circles. "Ears to sharpen," he shrilled again. "Eyes to sharpen, edges taken off of tongues." She smiled up at him engagingly, noting how his gray hair hung over the back of his collar. She felt no fear of him whatever. "I think you're nice, Mister Man Who Makes Faces," she announced presently. "I'm so glad I can look straight at you. I didn't know you, 'cause your voice is different, and 'cause I'd never seen you before 'cept when I was looking down at you." He had been ignoring her. But now, "Wasn't my fault that we didn't meet face to face," he retorted. Though his voice was still cross, his round, bright eyes were almost kind. "If you'll remember, I often came under your window." "And I threw you money," she answered, nodding brightly. "I wanted to come down and talk to you oh, lots of times, only " At that he relented altogether, and, reaching out, shook hands cordially. "Wouldn't you like," said he, "to have a look at my establishment?" He jerked a thumb over a shoulder. "Here's where I make faces." In the city she had seen many wonderful shops, catching glimpses of some from the little window of her car, visiting others with Miss Royle or Jane. Among the former were those fascinating ones, usually low of ceiling and dark with coal dust, where grimy men in leather aprons tried shoes on horses; and those horrifying places past which she always drove with closed eyes places where, scraped white and head downward, hung little pigs, pitiful husks of what they once had been, flanked on either hand by long necked turkeys with poor glazed eyes. And once she had seen a wonderful shop in which men were sawing out flat pieces of stone and writing words on them with chisels. But this shop of the Man Who Makes Faces was the most interesting of all. It occupied a square of hard packed ground, a square as broad as the nursery. And curiously enough, like the nursery, it had, marking it off all the way around its outer edge, a border of flowers. It was shaded by one huge tree. "Lime tree," explained the little old gentleman. "And the lights " "Don't tell me!" she cried. "I know. They're lime lights." These made the shop exceedingly bright. Full in their glare, neatly disposed, were two short legged tables, a squat stool, and a high, broad bill board. The Man Who Makes Faces seated himself on the stool at one of the tables, and began working industriously. But Gwendolyn could only stand and stare about her, so amazed that she was dumb. For in front of the little old gentleman, and spread handily, were ears and eyes, noses and mouths, cheeks and chins and foreheads. And upon the bill board, pendant, were toupees and sideburns and mustaches, puffs, transformations, and goatees. And one coronet braid, a red one, glossy and thick and handsome. The bill board also held an assortment of tongues, long and scarlet. These, a score in all, were ranged in a shining row, and underneath them was a sign which bore this announcement: Tongues in all languages, dead or modern. Chic, if 7 are purchased at once. Gwendolyn clapped her hands. "Oh, how nice!" she exclaimed, finding her voice again. "Quite so," said the little old gentleman, shoving away a tray of chins and cheeks, and reaching for a forehead. "Welcome, convenient, and satisfactory." She saw her opportunity. "Please," she began, "I'd like to buy 6." She counted on her fingers. "I'll have a French tongue, a German tongue, a Greek tongue, a Latin tongue, and later, though, if you don't happen to have 'em on hand, a Spanish and an Italian." Then she heaved a sigh of relief. "I'm glad I saw these," she added. "They'll save me a lot of work. And they've helped me about a definition. I looked for lashing in my big dictionary, and it said to whip, but I couldn't see how anybody could whip anybody else with a tongue. Now, though " The Man Who Makes Faces nodded. "Just wait till you see the King's English," he bragged. "The King's English? Will I see him?" "Likely to," he answered, selecting an eye. He had all his eyes about him in a circle, each looking as natural as life. There were blue eyes, and brown eyes, hazel eyes, and "Oh!" she exclaimed suddenly. "I remember! It was you who gave the Policeman a black eye." "One fine black eye," he answered, chuckling as he poked about in a pile of noses and selected a large sized one. "Yes, yes. And recently I made a lovely blue pair for a bad tempered child who'd cried her own eyes out." She assented. She had heard of just such a case. "Once I saw some eyes in a shop window," she confided. "It was a shop where you could buy spectacles." He wagged his beard proudly. "I made every one of 'em," he boasted. "Oh, yes, indeed." And polished away at the tip of the large nose. She considered for a moment. "I'm glad I know," she said gravely. "I wanted to, awful much." After that she studied the bill board for a time, and presently discovered that a second supply of eyes was displayed there, being set in it as jewels are set in brooches. She pointed. "What kind are those?" He looked surprised at the question. "The bill board is the rear wall of my shop," said he. "And those eyes are wall eyes." She flushed with pleasure. "That's exactly what I thought," she declared. She began to walk up and down, one hand in the patch pocket, to make sure it was really there. For this was all too good to be true. Here in this land so new to her, and so wonderful, were things about which she had pondered, and puzzled, and asked questions. The tongues, for instance, and the lime lights, and the soda water. How simply and naturally each was now explained, explained as she herself had imagined each would be. She felt a sudden pride in herself. So far, had anything been really unexpected? As she went back to pause in front of the little old gentleman, it was with a delightful sense of understanding. Oh, this was one of her pretend games, gloriously come true! Now she felt a very flood of questions surge to her lips. She pointed to a deep yellow bowl set on the table beside him. "Would you mind telling me what that is?" she asked. "That? That's a sauce box." And he smiled. "Oh, what's it full of, please?" "Full of mouths," cheerily. It was her turn to smile. She smiled into the sauce box. At its center was a queer object, very like a short length of dried apple peeling. "I s'pose that's part of a mouth?" she ventured. He picked up the object and balanced it across his thumb. "You've guessed it," he declared. "And it's a fine thing to carry around with one. You see, it's a stiff upper lip." He tossed it back. My! She took a deep breath. "Once I asked and asked about a stiff upper lip." He went on with his polishing. "Should think you'd be more interested in these," he observed, giving a nod of the ragged hat toward a shallow dish at his elbow. "Little girls generally are." She looked, and saw that the dish was heaped high with what seemed to be white peanuts peanuts that tapered to a point at one end. She puckered her brows over them. "Can't guess?" said he. "Then you didn't drink enough of that soda water. Well, ever hear of a sweet tooth?" At that she clapped her hands and jumped up and down. "Why, I've got one!" she cried. "Oh?" said the little old gentleman. "Thought so. I always keep a supply on hand. Carve 'em myself out of cube sugar." "Oh, aren't they funny!" She leaned above the shallow dish. "Funny?" repeated the Man Who Makes Faces. "Not when they get into the wrong mouth. A wry mouth, for instance, or an ugly mouth. A sweet tooth should go, you understand, only in a sweet face." "Is it a sweet tooth that makes a face sweet?" she inquired. "Quite so." He held up the nose to examine it critically. She watched him in silence for a while. Then, "You don't mind telling me who's going to have that?" she ventured, pointing a finger at the nose. "This? Oh, this is for a certain little boy's father." She blinked thoughtfully. "Is his name " she began, and stopped. "His father, the unfortunate man, has been keeping his own nose to the grindstone pretty steadily of late, and so "I just can't remember the name I'm thinking about," said Gwendolyn, troubled. He glanced up, and the round bright eyes were grave as he searched her face. "I wonder," said he in a low voice, "if you know who you are." She smiled. "Well, I've been acquainted with myself for 7 years," she declared. "But do you know who you are?" The round eyes were full of tears. She felt uncertain. "I did just a little while ago. Now, though " He reached to take her hand. "Shall I tell you?" "Yes," in a whisper. "You're the Poor Little Rich Girl." He patted her hand. "The Poor Little Rich Girl." She nodded bravely, and stood looking up at him. He was old and unkempt out at elbows, too, and the bottoms of his baggy trousers hung in dusty shreds. But his lined and bearded face was kind. "I haven't been so very happy," she said falteringly. He shook his head. "Not happy. And no step relations, either." "Well, she felt uncertain. "There are some step houses just across the street." "Not the same thing," he declared shortly. "But As he coughed, he waved an arm cheerily. "Things will improve. Oh, yes. All you've got to do is follow my advice." The gray eyes were wistful and questioning. "You've got a lot to do," he went on. "Oh, a great deal. For instance," here he paused, running his fingers through his long hair, "there's Miss Royle, and Thomas, and Jane." She was silent for a long moment. Miss Royle! Thomas! Jane! In the joy of being out of doors, of having real dirt to scuff in, and high grass through which to brush, of having a plaid gingham with a pocket, and all the fizzing drink she wished, of being able to dabble and wade, and of having good, squashy soda mud for pies, in the joy of all this, she had utterly forgotten them. She looked up at the tapered trees, and down at the flower bordered ground. Then at the bill board, and the loaded tables of that marvelous establishment. There was still so much to see! And oh, how many scores of questions to ask! He bent until his beard swept the sauce box. "You'll just have to keep out of their clutches," he declared. Again she nodded, twisting and untwisting her fingers. "I thought maybe they didn't come here." "Come?" he grunted. "Won't they be hunting you? Well, keep out of their clutches, I say. That's absolutely necessary. You'll see why, if you let 'em get you. For how will you ever find your father?" "Oh!" A sudden flush swept her face. She looked at the ground. She had forgotten Miss Royle and Thomas and Jane. Worse! Until that moment she had forgotten her father and mother. "There's that harness of his," went on the Man Who Makes Faces. He thought a moment, pursing his lips and twiddling his thumbs. "We'll have to consider how we can get rid of it." She glanced up. "Where does he come?" she asked huskily. "My father?" Yes. Where?" He seemed uneasy, scratched his jaw, and rearranged a row of chins. "Well, the fact is, he comes here to buy candles that burn at both ends." "Of course. Is it far?" "Out in a new fashionable edition. Yes, addition, subtraction, multiplication." "You won't mind showing me the way?" Now her face grew pale with earnestness. He smiled sadly. "I? Your father thinks poorly of me. He's driven me off the block once or twice, you know. Though," he looked away thoughtfully, "when you come to think of it, there isn't such a lot of difference between your father and me. He makes money. I make faces." It was one of those unpleasant moments where there seemed very little to be said. She stood on the other foot. He began polishing once more. "Then there's that bee," he resumed. "Moth er!" He went on as quickly as possible. "Of course, there's lots of things worse than one of those social honey gathering insects." "She sees nothing else. She hears nothing else." "We'll help her get rid of it. If." "If?" "You've got a lot to overcome. Recollect the policeman?" She retreated a step. "Just suppose we meet him, and the bear that " "My!" "Yes, and a certain doctor." "Oh, dear!"
"Bad. Pretty bad."
"Where does my mother come?" timidly. The question embarrassed.
The place is full of carriage lamps," he began. And side lights, and search lights, and lanterns."
She looked concerned.
"I can't guess." "Just ordinary lanterns," he added. "You see, the Madam comes to Robin Hood's barn."
Robin Hood's barn!
"Exactly. Nice day, isn't it?"
By the expression on his face, Gwendolyn judged that Robin Hood's barn, of which she had often heard, was a most undesirable spot. "Is it far?" she asked, swallowing.
"No, only we'll have to go around it."
Somehow, all at once, he seemed the one friend she had. She put out a hand to him. "You will go with me?" she begged. "Oh, I want to find my father and my mother."
"You want to tell 'em the real truth about those 3 servants they're hiring. Unless I'm much mistaken, your parents have never taken one good square look at those 3."
"Oh, let's start!" Now, of a sudden, all the hopes and plans of the past months came crowding back into her mind. "I want to sit at the grown up table," she declared. "And I want to live in the country and go to day school." He hung the hand organ over a shoulder.
"You can do every one of them," he said, "if we find your father and mother."
"We'll find them!" she cried determinedly.
"We'll find 'em," he said, "if, as we go along, we don't leave one single stone unturned."
"Oh!" She glanced about her, searching the ground.
"Not one," he repeated. "And now we'll start."
He picked up 2 or 3 small articles an ear, a handful of hair, a plump cheek. "But there's a stone right here," said Gwendolyn. It was a small one, and lay at her feet, close to the table leg. He peered over.
"All right. Turn it."
She stooped, turned the rock, straightened. The next moment a chill swept her. The next she felt a heavy hand upon her shoulder, and clumsy fingers busy with the buttons on the gingham dress. "Tee hee hee hee!" It was the voice that had called from a distance. Hearing it now, she felt a sudden sickish, sinking feeling. She whirled. A strange creature was kneeling behind her a creature dressed in black sateen, and like no human being she had ever met before. For it was two faced. One face, the front, was blowsy and freckled, with a small pug nose and a quarrelsome mouth. The other, the face on what with ordinary persons was the back of the head, was dark and forbidding, its nose a large brick colored pug, the mouth underneath shaped most extraordinarily not unlike a barrette, for it was wide and long and square at the corners, and full of shining tortoise shell teeth. But the creature had only one tongue. This was loose at both ends, so that there was one tip for her front face and one for the back. But she had only one pair of eyes. These were reddish. They watched Gwendolyn boldly from the front, then rolled quickly to the rear to stare at the man who makes faces. At the sight of the two faced creature, Gwendolyn shrank away, frightened. "Oh, oh, my!" she faltered. Both horrid mouths now bellowed hilariously, and the creature reached out a big hand.
"Look here, Gwendolyn," it ordered. "You ain't goin'."
Gwendolyn lifted terrified eyes for a second look at the brick colored hair, the blowsy countenance. No possibility of doubt remained. It was Jane! End of chapter 8